Hello and welcome to the Fabulous at 50 podcast, celebrating a vibrant global community of women over 50 through entertaining interviews that will inspire, educate, and empower. Your host, Joanne Neweduk, was born to nurture and promote vibrance. Joanne is both the Community Director for Calgary, Canada, and oversees the global operations for Fabulous at 50. As an oncology nurse, integrative practitioner in multiple modalities, life skills mentor, and manager, Joanne moves people from challenging situations to positive outcomes through the use of her innate gifts and learned skills. Here's your host, Joanne Neweduk.
Hello and welcome to today's podcast. I have a fascinating guest for you today, and truly her story is just amazing, and I'm so grateful to have her on. So first of all, welcome Cynthia Hamilton Urquhart.
Well, thank you very much, Joanne. I'm very excited to be here.
Now, before we get started, I want to share your bio with our listening audience, just so that they have a bit of a story, and then you and I get to talk further on that subject. Cynthia is a retired RCMP officer. For those of you who are not from Canada, that stands for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and that is our national police force. Having served for over 25 years. She retired 10 years ago, and 2 years into her retirement was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and that stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Her healing journey completely changed her life, and she is now a speaker, writer, mentor, and mental health advocate for first responders. Cynthia is currently writing her memoir, working with New York Times bestselling author Laura Munson. So welcome aboard. This is impressive, and at the same time truly heartfelt, because you really have experience things that so many of us just hear about, as you know, that our first responders go through. So I'm so fascinated to hear more about your story. Could you share just a little bit about your story, and maybe what shifted when you got into your midlife?
Right. Well, very quickly, my story. I joined the RCMP back in 1985, and the reason that I did that, I grew up in a family where my brother was disabled, and I found out at a very young age how people that are different, that don't fit in, are picked upon and preyed upon. And it was when I was 6 years old, I decided that I wanted to help other people and protect them. So I went to university, graduated, and joined the RCMP. When I joined, women had only been in the force for 11 years, and only 4% of police officers at that time were actually women in Canada. So it was quite a journey, to say the least. I loved my career, but it was difficult. There were a lot of challenges. There were high highs and low lows, of course.
I can imagine that. I mean, what I'm hearing right now is just what a trailblazer you are. And so before we even go any further, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the service that you have given. And I know that that has been like an incredible career for you. But at the same time, as you've said, is there, first responder type work can be so difficult.
Yeah,
So,
we take it for granted. It's just something we don't think about because it's not something that everybody is drawn to, and it's not something that everybody can deal with. And when I joined, and it's only starting to shift now, but society in general hasn't valued mental health. It's that bad, nasty topic that nobody talks about, and we tiptoe around it. And it was no different in the first responder world. And by first responders, it's not just fire and police. That's what comes to people's mind. But you talk about our healthcare workers that are out there. You talk about veterinarians that are dealing with injured animals who have been
yes.
abused and suffer. And so there's so many components. The military, our corrections officers. It really is a wide angle of our society that we could look at and call first responders. So, we just did not value mental health. And I didn't either, not because I didn't want to, but I didn't know any better. It really, the difficult things that we deal with in policing, you were basically taught, you don't, you just put it away. You take notes.
Yeah, yeah, tough it out, right? Like,
You tough it out.
you can't do it. The place we didn't have the right mechanisms, shall we say, or the resources in place back then. Um, so I'm curious. So I mean, you had a wonderful career, and I'm just curious if we could tap into a little bit. Like, were you married? Did you have children? How did you juggle all that in your life?
Yeah. Well, it was, those things were huge challenges at the time. So I married young at 23 years old. And I didn't have children till I was 28, around 28. So I
Yeah,
had a,
same as me. That's when I
yeah. So just, later on, but juggling parenthood and being a female police officer, really didn't go together. There were childcare issues. In those days, if we became pregnant, nobody replaced us. So if you worked in a smaller detachment and you only had 7 or 8 people working, well, if I got pregnant and was off, then nobody took my place, and the guys had to carry the workload.
really, that's just
So there were,
crazy. That's
yeah,
shameful.
it seems.
Really, thinking back on that now, that's shameful.
Well, but it was the norm, it was the
And
norm.
I guess, yeah, if someone was off on sick leave for something else, then it would be the same. Yeah.
Well, it would, but it was more acceptable. It was something, it's like it was
Yeah.
a choice, and it was like somehow we got pregnant on our own. I don't know how that works, but
Yeah.
it was the nature of things back then. So you would carry guilt with you that you were pregnant. We didn't have a year off. We had 16 weeks of full-time pay, and then an additional 8 weeks if we wanted to take 50% cut in our pay.
Hmm.
And that was very difficult to do. So basically, you're going from being a nurturer back into being an enforcer. And it's a real struggle. It's a real struggle to go from parenting.
That's a really good point because honestly, like, I mean, for those of us that have, birthed a child, y- you're right. You have all those hormones coursing through your body to be more than nurturer. And it's not necessarily consistent with being the enforcer. Not saying that women can't do it, but for that time, that period of time in your life, I've never given that thought before.
Well, just exactly. It's women can absolutely do it, but I can tell you, when you don't know that it's coming, when and you're still, your body is coursing with hormones. You're still trying to heal. For myself, I had very difficult births, so I
Mm,
physically was still trying to heal. Your breasts are leaking, and yet you're out patrolling in a police car.
yeah.
It was a real difficult set of circumstances to deal with, and obviously, not every female police officer that went through that would have the same experience, but there were many of us that it was very difficult to
Mhm.
try to juggle that, and then you're sleep deprived. So I had my 2 children. I separated from my first husband when my children were only 1 and 2 years old. So I was a
Mhm.
single mom working shift work in a small rural detachment. And in those days, we were expected to do voluntary overtime. So I would actually have to pay a babysitter to keep my children overnight in case I got called out. And so again, the logistics of those types of issues. We worked, the RCMP didn't fall under occupational health and safety in those days.
Mm.
So we worked alone. Very frequently, we would work 7, 8, 9, 10 days in a row. Our shifts would just go on and on. So incorporating all of that, it was very difficult, and it's a psychologically demanding job. And
Yeah, what I'm hearing is how determined were you? Like there obviously was enough of a pull like on the positive side of your career to fight your way through this. But again, like what a trailblazer because I understand,
things are not perfect in police forces around the world. We know that. But there has been changes. There at least has been steps forward, I can imagine. And thank you for your efforts or your experience in that, in making that happen.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate that. And you're right. There's still a long way to go, but as soon as we brought women into, with diversity, comes strength and power and insight. And when we brought women into policing, what it did is showed that there's other ways to do things. And
Yeah.
what I didn't realize as a young woman, I was only 23 when I joined.
Mm,
And I spent those first few years trying to be like one of the guys. And
mm.
that was, I think it's so common for women,
Yes.
we try to fit in, we don't want to stand out. And I certainly in those years didn't want to stand out. But what happened is that I lost the uniqueness of what I brought to the
I
profession.
love that you're saying that. Like that to me is one of the messages I want to get out there. And I read something recently and it reminded me, it was all about, as a woman, we're not trying to do everything a man does. We can do everything he can't, in a sense. It's like our power is in our being feminine or being female, and because we do have different skills. And what I'm hearing you saying is that that's where the power was. Let's bring in new angles and new ways of problem solving and new ways of dealing with situations.
Yeah, just exactly. It was recognizing that, I'm not better at policing than you are. I'm not worse at policing than you are. I'm different, and the difference is the power. It's the strength that we look at approaching circumstances. Men and women and anyone of diversity in the LGBTQ community and everyone. We all have such different perspectives that we can bring into whatever profession, job that we're doing. And with that, we just make everything so much better. And if we, and during this process, I do want to make sure I mention there, I worked with some absolutely incredible men. And
Hmm.
it was interesting. One of the first staff sergeants I had, my first posting was in Ottawa for a 6-year period, and then I went back to New Brunswick and got into more of the rural policing, which I loved because the connections with the community. But he was a staff sergeant who probably had 30 years service, who had been in the RCMP when there were horses and before women had joined. And he would be asked to send members to a particular, they had a request for support, and he would just send whomever. And I remember somebody coming up to him and saying, well, there's you're sending 2 women or how many women? And he goes, well, why would I determine how many are men and how many are women when I have 5 people and you need 3, and they're all police officers who've done the same training? And that was very forward thinking for somebody
Hmm.
from his generation at that time. And basically what he was saying, we've done the same training,
Yeah. Yeah.
we carry the same equipment, therefore we can do the exact same job, but we may approach it differently.
Right.
And that's
Right.
okay.
I think it's good having that blend. Now, I know that you had a major shift in your life when you got into what midlife, shall we say, or turned 50. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. For myself, my midlife was the culmination of all the difficult things that had gone on in my life that I hadn't dealt with. And I think we can all relate to the fact that if something comes up and we don't want to deal with it at the time, I would always tell myself, well, I'll deal with it when it's convenient. I'll deal with it later. No
Mhm.
big deal. Deal with it later. So you have life events, and then when you take first responders, every day we have traumatic events that we're putting on top of this
Yeah.
pile. And I say to people, it's like having a shelf, and for every difficult memory or circumstance that you put on your shelf, well, the shelf, the infrastructure can only hold so much weight. And
That is so true. Actually, I just got a shiver with that. That is a great analogy because really, any single book or any single item that you're putting on that shelf, you can handle,
right.
even a bunch of them. But
Mhm.
at some point in time, there's critical mass and it gives.
It gives.
So I understand that this happened to you.
This is exactly what happened, and it was It was actually, I had been, my husband and I were transferred quite a bit different. We had worked in 6 different provinces. I'd arrived at our training academy and I was to be teaching. It was my first day of work. And I was teaching not because it was a job I
Can
was.
I interrupt for one moment just so I understand? Was this with your first husband or your
I'm
remarried
sorry,
at this point?
I dropped that part of the
No,
story.
that's
Yes.
okay. I realize
So I
we
was
moved
a
on to
single,
something
I
else
was a
just so we
single,
can follow along.
yes, that's right. I was a single mom
Yeah.
with a 1 and a 2-year-old. A few years later, I remarried when my children were 4 and 5 years old to another member, and he had 3 children. So
Okay.
we created a blended family of 5 children, and we're happily married 25 years later,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
our
And you
adult
said
children.
he was a RCMP
He's
officer
been
as
an
well?
RCMP member for
Yeah.
35 years.
Nice, nice.
So,
Okay.
yeah, it was, you know what, it was, I have been blessed to have a partner that I can, we can support each other through. My
I can
husband is
relate.
also diagnosed with PTSD. So the two
Oh,
of us in the same household have PTSD. But I had a breakdown, and it was in 2008 when on my first day at work, I was shown 15 manuals that we needed to learn to teach the new cadets coming in. And in that moment, that was the straw for me. I remember my mouth drying out, my brain saying, "You're done. You can't do this." And standing there just staring at the books. And I had to leave. I had just met my 2 colleagues that I'd be working with, told them I was just feeling ill, and ran out sobbing and was put off work for 3 months. But
wow.
even in that, everybody knew I was overwhelmed, but we still didn't have discussions about PTSD at that time. It wasn't in the vocabulary. And so when I had that breakdown, I took time off, tried to do some self-care, went into some therapy. But what was happening, and this is something I think is really important for your listeners to understand, is that a lot of times, especially women, we underreport what is going on.
Oh,
Not always on
absolutely.
purpose. It's not even something that we're aware of, but we're so used to caring for other people. We put everybody else first and forget that we're in the equation. And on my website, I have a quote by Audrey Hepburn, and most women in our age group will know who Audrey Hepburn is, a famous actress. And it says, "You will discover that you have 2 hands. One is for helping yourself, and the other is for helping others." And
I love that quote.
it's a beautiful quote,
Yeah.
and we just don't do that. So underreporting, not telling people we're not doing well. Well, if we don't know that we're not doing well, where do you start?
Yeah.
So it's not that people don't have the will and want to look after themselves. A lot of times they don't even realize that they're struggling. And
Well, I totally agree with that. And I just wanted to interject that what comes to mind is when I'm working with my clients is that so often I talk about I loved your analogy of putting the books on the shelf. That one's a really good one because there's a breaking point. I talk a bit about the stress of life. So the stress of your job, of your family, it's like mud kind of going on us. And I think that when we ignore things over and over and over again, we actually lose perspective of what is okay. You know, when I talk about people being in the mud pit, when we're in the thick of it, when we're at the worst point in our lives, we forget there's sunshine up there. We have no perspective. So how can we say we're not doing okay if we don't know there is a better,
well,
right?
just exactly. You don't know, and society in general, never mind first responders. Like I said, we did not value mental health. It's always been that other thing, that nobody talks about, which is so wrong because it's part of what makes us human.
Yeah.
And the importance of understanding it is part of what makes us
Yeah.
human, and what makes us so unique, no matter what form that comes in. We just
Absolutely.
we
And
need.
being and mental health is so important as far as one for the person, but two for the people around. Because
Oh,
my
absolutely.
story is my mom had, when you talk about having that breakdown moment, it used to just be called a nervous breakdown, right? Your nervous system can't take it anymore. It's a breakdown. My mom had issues, and when my parents broke up
So I know what it was like as a child to watch someone I love, in this case my mom, not function well. And the more it's more retrospect, but I look back and go, okay, where might this have even stemmed from? And again, that shelf
Right.
for her, I believe it was also she was a teenager living in the heart of England during the Second World War. That was her teen years. I can only imagine what she went through. So similar to, you have your normal life experiences, plus you have these. And so people now that are coming from torn areas and so forth, what's so important is to deal with trauma in the moment. And there's so many different ways. And Fab at 50, not that we're out there to be mental health supporters, but I do believe it's a way of processing when we have community, when you have ways to shake off or know that you can go to someone if something is happening, or to prevent as it goes further, right? So I know for you, then I think you told me before that you were actually officially diagnosed with
Yes.
with
So what
this,
happened
right?
when I turned
When you
50 in
when
my
you turned
50th
50.
year? That was my gift. And I don't say that tongue in cheek. I say it was a gift. It was that diagnosis. And I was devastated by the diagnosis. I was embarrassed, ashamed, all those things that come with it. And what was interesting is that my husband was diagnosed the year before.
Hmm.
And that was okay because he was a man. That was my perception. And all I knew
Wow.
back then was that PTSD was what happened to men that went to war. I was very gender specific, and it was okay because they had earned the right to be diagnosed with something like that. And this was my view of it. So when it happened to me, I was all of those things. I was a letdown. I was a letdown to female police officers at that time. That's what I felt.
You were the trailblazer and you're going to do
Yeah,
this.
but
Yeah.
yeah, but no,
Wow.
look at all the other women around me that don't have it. I was for women in general, like shame on me for. And when I look back and reflect back to that now, and I thought, and those are the thoughts that I had. Oh, it's just so sad that that was what happened. And what I realize is that so I was diagnosed in 2013. That is not that long ago. My
No, it's
husband
not.
in 2012. And
Like
at that
8 years
time,
ago.
yeah, most people's perception of PTSD was the Hollywood version. It's what we saw. Or it was the person the homeless man who was an alcoholic because he was dealing with PTSD. And that was where it started and finished. And I was probably just as guilty as everybody else
Of
of having
believing that. So
perception.
can you share, just so people really understand, because we always say the title as if people understand, for you, your experience of it on both how it impacts your life, but on a physiological level, what does that mean for someone to have this?
Right. So for me, it's the post-traumatic stress disorder meant that what was happening and what I didn't recognize coming up to a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder is that the ability to make decisions was gone.
Impacted.
I couldn't even decide what we should cook for a meal.
Right.
So I became overwhelmed at very minor things when I used to be able to multitask, two people working in a family and five children and two cats and two dogs. And, I did it all. So becoming overwhelmed, forgetting, my memory started to be impacted. I couldn't sleep appropriately. But what was going on was my husband, who also had PTSD. So for me, PTSD was more internalized. My
Yep.
husband's was more external. So moody, he was more the textbook, moody,
More
things that
expressive.
didn't bother him before. So we had two very different visions of what it looked like.
Yeah,
And,
two ways of expression
and
and two
yes,
ways it manifested. But in reality, what happens is there is actual physiological anatomical changes in the brain. When you take a brain scan of, say, a healthy functioning brain versus one who has this, they look different on these SPECT scans. There is a difference. So you can actually track through whether it's therapy or treatments them getting better again. And I know you're on the road to recovery. You're not fully there yet because we've had some conversations, and I know I do some really interesting work that, may help, but right now you're doing some interesting, I think some testing and some scanning that will share where you're at, give you a baseline right now.
Yeah, just exactly. And I've got so many tools now that help me, but I still have struggles, and I'll probably still always have struggles. But hyperarousal is still, a loud noise is still very difficult for me. I can't watch anything to do with animals because part of policing and part of policing in rural areas, or especially back in our day, was we were everything. So we didn't have someone to call to deal with an animal that had been hit by a car, and to see a suffering animal. I've always been tenderhearted. So
Yeah.
those traumas, stayed with you. We would have to deal, we had ambulance drivers, like they weren't EMTs. So we would be the first people on scene to really
Mhm.
severe accidents and those things. So some of those things are still with me, the hyperarousal, and I can't even watch Dumbo. and
Wow.
but I can also laugh at myself. I've stopped criticizing myself,
Beautiful.
and I've accepted who I am, and work with what new boundaries I've had to set for myself to stay healthy and positive. So
Nice.
in that journey, but for my husband and I, it was very different, and because of that, initially when I was working, I went to the operational stress clinic here in Calgary, which is for first responders,
Mhm.
military and RCMP, because we're federal and it's funded through federal programs. It's sad that we don't have that for everybody across the country at
Yeah.
equal levels,
And
because
when we go outside of Canada as well and to all the different countries, I mean, there is such a disparity. On some are ahead of the game and they're using all the different types of therapy that can be supportive. Because I personally believe that since we're so bio individual, is the same therapy. It's not like here's the therapy and it fixes everyone. Everybody needs to gravitate to what works for them. And so all around the world, but it is getting more acknowledgement.
There's
Um,
more there's more acknowledgement. And I was actually speaking to a paramedic a few weeks ago, and I asked her, because she's new, she's a younger pair, and she said the conversation is there now, and she acknowledged what we're doing by bringing these stories out, so she appreciated it. My concern is still about access. It's great to have the conversation, but what happens is that you know appropriate care means money and time and energy,
exactly.
and they
Yeah,
don't want to,
exactly.
so many organizations and at the government levels, and that they're not understanding that if you're proactive with it, then
Exactly. That will
people.
make a difference. And that's what I wanted to bring up. Of course, being a nurse, one of the things that I always look at when people say, well, is this the answer? Is that the answer? And I'm like, yes, yes, and yes. What I have been taught and what I understand for any issue. So in this case, the post-traumatic stress, but really anything that's going on within our society, we need multiple levels.
Mhm.
We need to give care for the people who already have been diagnosed. We
Yes.
also need to be out there looking and catching the people that are undiagnosed, that are suffering in silence and on their own. And then very importantly, there's two things: is we need the health promotion. What can we be teaching our young children and
Mhm.
people now to do to perhaps avoid that? Like, there's still going, first responders are always going to be walking into horrendous situations. That's not going to change. And that can be, for me, it was more within nursing. I worked on a cancer ward and I worked palliative. And some of that, even though so for us, it can be very traumatic being around someone dying if your own mindset isn't around this can also be beautiful. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a mindset shift that can happen in the situation. We definitely have, and there's supposed to be, if there is a code called. And if it's one that was not successful, that can be very traumatic to the people that are trying to resuscitate that person. There needs to be immediate debriefing. So there needs to be both of how do we promote the mental health and how do we mitigate when there is trauma, which ultimately should reduce the amount of post-traumatic stress we have, right? That's
Yes.
post-traumatic stress is what sinks inside of us, not just in our minds, but like truly in our tissue. Because I'm sure you would support this, that it's not just things not working in our minds, as there's more aches and pains and illness throughout the entire body.
Well,
And
yes, Joanne, like one of the things that I've learned is that our bodies do hold trauma. And
absolutely.
so I used to say, well, why am I, somebody would make a comment or something would go on and the tears would come. Well, as I worked through therapy and finding out about things, it's like, oh my gosh, you really do absorb the traumas. It really is held in us.
Yeah.
And if people had tools, like I've got two key things that lines, and one is by Dr. Wayne Dyer,
Yeah.
who the late Dr. Wayne Dyer, who said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And it's so
Absolutely.
true. And it's interesting because one of the concepts and one of the struggles my husband has had is dealing with loneliness, and that has to come from his past as well as things to do with his work world. But when you change the word lonely, meaning that I'm by myself and nobody cares, and you change lonely, meaning I'm loved and I feel lonely because the person I want to be next to is gone for a week, does it ever shift how you look at the circumstances?
Yeah.
So if we had those tool sets, it's, we come from a generation that didn't, and it is what it is. But I believe so strongly in the fact that it's my job to continue serving. And the way I'm serving is by telling people, look, if you have the tool set, and you can go to your toolbox and you understand what's going on, you understand you need to do those things, you understand that there's red flags, and oh, you know what, I better check in on this, then everybody benefits from it. And if I can share that so that the
Yeah.
newer people coming up through will have those tools, then it's the greatest gift that
Perfect.
I ever get.
I think that you actually have just answered my two next questions, but maybe we'll do it in a nutshell. If you can share in a summary, what is it you believe in and what do you personally stand for?
Oh gosh, I believe that mental health has value. In our world up until present, nobody has valued mental health, or very few, I should say, have valued and understood that it's part of the human condition.
Yeah.
So I believe so strongly in it, and I believe that everybody matters. Everybody matters, and it was one thing I loved in policing was being able to walk up to someone who was struggling, and even if it was somebody I had to take into custody because their day just hadn't gone well, it was just trying in the time that I was dealing with them to let them know they still mattered. And
Oh, beautiful.
so
Yeah.
it's just so important to me that
That
people,
compassion is so important.
it absolutely is. And to go into jobs like ours without having compassion for people, we see people at their best of times, we see people at their worst of times. And if you don't go into the job with compassion and understanding for the struggles, I would love to just add this, Joanne, it was something that came to my mind years ago when I was in policing. I felt like the police were the fishing net of society. So when the education system broke down, so children couldn't learn the same way as everybody else, we were the ones that were called, and the kids were the 16-year-olds out on the streets. When
Collect
the
them.
healthcare system broke down and couldn't cope with the mental health care, we were the ones that picked up the pieces on the
Wow.
street. When animals were abused because people were angry, we were the ones that picked them up. So
Hmm.
for all of the broken systems that we have in society up until now, we have called the police to deal with it.
So
And
true.
as
That's so
society,
true.
it really is. And
Wow. Yeah.
I think it's a message that we don't, and what's happened is that going back to the days when I started in policing, I had two tools on my what we call our sidearm or gun belt or whatever. So I had my revolver that had 6 bullets in it. That was it. That's all we carried, plus a set of handcuffs. And that was it. And look at what you see now that we have had to equip ourselves with, or how that has evolved. And it's sad because that is not supposed to be the role of the police. We're not capable of fixing all of those systems that are broken. Everybody calls on us to do that, and it was sad because I wanted to fix everything and I couldn't. And I knew that we weren't the organization that should have been dealing with all kinds of different
Yeah, it
things.
really sounds like that is truly a fantastic insight on how and why, because it does default to the
Yes,
policing of the world, that more collaboration of each of those
absolutely.
others, whether it be social work or something in the education or something in the mental health, that for the safety of them, when things have gone awry, you need the police, but you also need the support workers and maybe more teamwork. So
Yeah.
back to our summary with so what you truly believe in is that mental health matters, that there's things that we can do for it, and that if you notice things going awry, get help. And
Yes.
what do you personally stand for?
I personally stand for um, providing first responders with a sense of hope. And know, I want them to know that no matter how far down they go, I went from not even being able to leave my home at the worst of the worst with my struggles, to speaking a couple of years ago at a first responder suicide awareness conference to 800
Wow.
people.
What a huge leap. That is so incredible.
And
And can you share with our listening audience how and where they can go? Because I know it's not a program that you have set up right now. It's more of it's a resource, it's a website, it's where people can go to, whether they are a first responder themselves or a friend of someone or a family and they want to find more info. How and where can they find you?
Sure. So my website is cynthiahamiltonurquhart.com, and I'm sure you'll have that.
Yeah, it's all in the show notes.
Oh, perfect. So that I know my last name is hard to spell. Yeah, and the purpose of it, right at this point, because this is new for me. This is a new journey for me. Sharing, putting everything out there is very difficult. Coming from a policing background where we were private, quiet, and
Yeah.
but everything. And so, the purpose of my website at this point is to allow people and draw people in who are struggling to say, "Hey, come in here and feel safe. Take a read of what's gone on in my world." And a lot of people would make comments to me, "How did you manage? How did you survive this?" And it's like, you can do this, and you're not alone. I have contact information if someone is struggling and wants to reach out and just have a conversation, whether it's through email or a call of some sort. It's a safe place. And whether you're a first responder, family, friends, even someone who's struggling with PTSD, please come. And I do have a download if you sign up for my newsletter, and it just gives you some tips about things that can really help make a difference on your
Excellent.
day-to-day journey.
Perfect. And on that note, like that was perfect. It sounds like I scripted you on that and I didn't.
No.
We always end our conversation with me asking if you could share 3 tips. Now I know your download has many more, but maybe a couple tips from there so people have an idea of what they are. And then just another tip that just comes to mind, that your pearls of wisdom that we can
Sure.
take away.
Well, and the first one I'm going to go to, and just so the listeners know, you didn't ask me to say this, but it's connection and community is so important. And I didn't understand how much I needed that if I was going to heal. So, having connected with you, Joanne, and the Fabulous 50 group of women is, you just know you're not alone, because we all sharing and connecting, and our stories and sharing our stories, it gives everybody strength, because it just helps you to go, "Hey, I'm not alone." And we need to know we're not alone, and we need to feel like we're part of something. So
Absolute
the
connection.
Fabulous 50 community is so important. So
Thank you.
connection, community.
Connection.
Another one is dare to be different. And what I mean by that, and it's funny, it's just by daring to be different, it means allow yourself to be who you are. And if it means you stand out in a crowd, then stand out in the crowd. And it gives you a sense of, it gives you permission to find out who you are. So I spent my life trying to fit in, and I had a box and I had a uniform that I wore, and everything was just set up for me. And when I retired, that was gone. And I think that's very common for women our age, you know, whether it's the empty nest, whether it's you're retiring, everything has kind of been set out for us. And we've spent so much time focusing on everyone else, we forget that we're
I
actually
I
our own
love that
unique
you're
person.
choosing that one, because what you're not aware of is one of an anthology chapter book that I have a submission in is called Be Daring.
Yes.
And I talk about that and what I do, and it's so akin to what you're saying. You're saying dare to be different. And mine is talking about be daring, as opposed to lots of times people talk about, oh, I'm being brave and I'm overcoming. But I think there's a difference between being brave and being daring. And I like daring has an element of adventure. And so
Yes.
when you're talking about daring to be different, then add adventure to your difference. Be daring. Make what it is unique and authentic about you exciting, and it's got a sense of adventure, and I know you're on an adventurous quest right now. So we've got community connection, dare to be you or dare to be different, and what's a third?
What's a third one? Well, I think one thing that is important to understand is that not everybody will get it. Not everybody will get you. Not
Okay.
everybody. And we look for validation from people. I didn't realize how much it was interesting. My uniform gave me permission to do the job I needed to do and the difficulties. But when I took that uniform off, I had a really hard time accepting that. So it's you have to understand that not everyone will get you, not everybody will like it, but don't let it shut down who you are. Don't use don't seek validation for someone to say, hey, it's okay that you do this. Just do it. I It's funny what I
Love
recognize
that.
is that there's a side of me. I love children and I love playfulness. And I think it's because of all the things that I dealt with in my policing world. I loved it, but I stuffed that down. So if I'm taking my groceries out to my car and I feel like jumping on the back of the cart while it rolls down, I do it. And I'm like,
Yeah,
I remember the first
that's
time
almost
I
a
did it.
fourth. You're sneaking in a fourth. Be playful.
Yes, I
These are
am.
so I'm laughing here because I just love what you're saying here, because when you go to the Fabulous at 50 website, you can, if you're not on our newsletter, you want to get on our newsletter, then you can choose the download that we have, the ebook that says Make Mine Fabulous, 21 ways to energize your life. And what you're talking about is this is more that first, like if you want to help integrate and avoid trauma settling in yourself, these are tips that can actually help flip you from the downside of life to the upside. And I love all those tips. And one of the things that came to mind when you were talking, and I don't think we really got too much chance to go into, is I know that you said that sound and music has been one of the main ways that you have, um, I guess, filled your soul would be a good way of putting it. In like a quick little summary there, how has that worked for you?
It's been incredible. I always loved music. I got away from it. My parents, we always had music in the house, and I got away from it through life, and I found it again. But what I did is I had always wanted to take voice lessons, and so I was the grown woman standing with the 8-year-olds in the little music store, and I was waiting to go into my voice lesson. And I remember standing there going, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this." But what I
For
did
you.
was the voice lessons, it was about me hearing my own voice. So I actually took it literally, and I went in there, and it was brutal at first. It was, oh my God, I can't stand my voice. And I know I have an okay singing voice. I know that now, and I can actually say it. So it was about doing something for me that I had always wanted to do. And it was my husband And I have the most wonderful partner. I'm so blessed, who said, then why aren't you doing it? And he kept pushing it. And I really didn't have, I
I got
have
to meet
a
your
good
husband. That
excuse.
is so wonderful. You know what I love about the fact that you said you were taking voice lessons? One, it was you were being daring. You weren't
Yes.
looking for approval for anyone else. And, and it was also playful, right?
Yes.
It allowed you. And so I'm going to use that little segue now to just say thank you so much for being on today's podcast, but also for joining the Fabulous at 50 community and being part of it, and joining and being not just part of the greater community, but becoming one of the Fab Club members. And I just want to share that for the listening audience, that one of the things that I do and what I offer is, when you do become a paid member, I offer a once a week, on a Tuesday, 1 hour, a different theme each week. And so one of them is called Community Connections. And so that's what you're talking about, is you want to come together in what is a community for you. So we offer a community for like-minded women who want to be functioning on the upside of life, who are in what we call midlife. So that is a range, kind of late 40s, well into our 60s. And because we're going through similar circumstances, whether it become the empty nester or so forth. And there is also, one of the themes is sensational self-care, and the fact that music worked for you. And I know that sound therapy really worked for me to bring about that release. And I, as a sound practitioner, work on, I offer sessions for an emotional release using voice and toning, and what we talked about, traumas that sit in our body. What I love about this technique is that you do not necessarily have to go back into the story, and you can release that and feel lighter. We had a wonderful lesson the other day. And so bringing in, even though we're not singing, we sometimes do toning, we use Tibetan bowls. And so I think there's such a connection between Cynthia and I, that the first time we met, what did we talk for? Like 2 hours, I think it was. And we could keep going on today. But the point of what I'm saying right now is that if you are listening and you want more of this energy in your life, and you want to get to know Cynthia more, go and check out her website. But also you can meet her just by coming to the Fabulous at 50 events. And we're meeting in real time, live. It's not all recordings. On our events, and you can just meet the most fascinating women. So Cynthia, I know that we need to go now. Actually, what maybe we'll do is I'll hit record when we do the debrief in the after, and we can always put it up in the membership site, because I'm sure we'll keep talking for a while. But for everyone else that's listening right now, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to leave on a serious note, that if you are questioning your own mental health, do not ignore that. Go and reach out, whether it's your family doctor, talk to a friend, just go to someone who is trusted, contact one of us, even if you're in our communities, and we will support you, and the other people that are resources will support you in finding the resource that you need to help get you the support. It's no different, as far as I'm concerned, as you have a broken arm, you have, gout in you have diabetes, whatever the illness is that you have, there is help out there on many levels for you.
Yes. Well, and Joanne, thank you so much for having me. And I feel humbled and honored to be able to share part of my story with you and your audience. And I just support everything that Joanne said, is that just remember that you do matter. You do. And give yourself the gift of care and look after yourself. And we're here. We're here as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. You've been listening to the Fabulous at 50 podcast with your host, Joanne Neweduk. Join us again for more inspirational interviews on topics that matter to you. If you like what you've heard on today's episode, check out the liner notes, or to learn more about this vibrant community that celebrates women over 50, please visit fabulousat50.com. That's www.fabulousat50.com.